All right, before you go into tuning your room up, throwing a bunch of panels everywhere and taking your gear out and just setting it all up because you're so excited, because it's like Christmas, and I know that feeling. You're like, get back from Guitar Center, unwrap your keyboard, throw your speakers up, let's go. Before you do all of that, let's talk about soundproofing and what soundproofing is. And also, I want to give you guys, you got to watch the whole way through, because I'm going to give you some game on what you can do to a pre-existing space, even a bedroom in your house, a living room, attic, basement, whatever, right? That you can't really do a bunch of construction on. How can you become more soundproof in that room? Okay, now the first thing I want to cover is soundproofing versus internal acoustic tuning. Okay, a lot of people think that by throwing broadband absorbers, foam on the wall, etc., that it's going to actually soundproof their area. And that's just simply not true. And it sucks, right? Because it's like, well, I bought all these panels and it's not making it more soundproof. There's a little bit of soundproofing that can happen through broadband absorption and bass trapping, because of course you're sucking up energy and you're converting that acoustic energy into heat. Yeah, sure, you can trap some sound waves, but for real soundproofing, meaning the car's outside, the neighbor playing his music really loud, your girlfriend, boyfriend, friends having a party, you know, in the other room. For that kind of soundproofing, you need a lot of density, weight, thickness, and air gaps, okay? So there's a few things that I want to point out here. And I'll also take you to the doors and I'll show you double door construction, and I'll show you some other things that we've done even in this room to make it more soundproof. The first thing you want to understand is the STC rating. Now this STC rating is really measured in decibels. And when we talk about decibels in soundproofing, we talk about decibels SPL. So the SPL, the sound pressure level of a room, right? And the sounds that are coming in and out of that room. In an anechoic chamber, basically the most quiet place in the world. The idea of an anechoic chamber is to actually test audio gear. That's how they test your speakers, you know, their SPL, like how loud the electronics are, bass, the frequency response, all that stuff, even the dynamics. And that's how they test your converters, your Apollo you got there, right? What is STC and why is it so important to construction and keeping sound in and out? Is because when you come into a room and it's quiet, really, really quiet, that means that you're gonna hear your reverb tails all the way down to where you can't actually perceive it anymore. Now, if you're in a louder room with a higher SPL, dB, SPL rating, you're going to actually hear most of that reverb tail, but then you're going to hear the noise of the room before you hear where that reverb tail ends, which makes your mixing decisions and your panning and all sorts of things, your dynamics, the way you're compressing, the way you're limiting, the distortion, the really subtle distortion that you don't want on your limiting, because it's going to translate to Spotify and everyone's going to be like, why'd you clip your track out? Because you couldn't hear it, because you couldn't hear that little extra dB, that dynamic range that's going into the noise floor in your room. So if the higher your noise floor is in your room, the less dynamics you're going to hear in your music, and the less details you're going to hear in your music, in your EQing, your compression, your reverb tails, your delays, the spaciousness, everything, panning, stereo imaging, you're losing it all. That's why STC ratings and soundproofing is so important, because it keeps the noise out and it keeps what's inside the studio. A great place to start with STC is to try to get the room to a point where when you're just sitting here, you can't hear anything else besides the blood boiling in you or the ringing in your ear because you got a little tinnitus like I do, right? So you really want to hear nothing else besides ambiance, like nothing, right? And if you're to the point where you have your room quiet enough, you'll probably start hearing your computer noise. You'll start hearing the electronics, right? Things like that. And that's why they put, people put the electronics in professional studios. They put them in different rooms that are sealed up and that are airtight, okay? A big part of soundproofing is to have different layers of and textures of different materials, because different materials stop different frequencies. So if you have like a big, thick concrete wall, you're not necessarily stopping all the same frequency bands. You may be stopping a lot of low end, but you're not stopping a lot of the 1K to the 3K. So you have like the human voice or someone yelling, you can hear it, or you can hear a car go by, or you can hear those mid-range frequencies really well. So then you start building with wood, plywood, and you start building with drywall, 5/8 drywall. The thicker, the more dense, the better, right? It's gonna stop the sound the best. So you wanna use multiple materials. That's really, really important. And another thing that's super important to building and soundproofing a room is to leave air gaps, because the air gap between, let's say you have this layer of something and then you have an air gap and then you have another layer of something. That air gap is where the sound is transmitting through the air. It actually will lose energy through that gap. Now, if you combine them and you hold them together, which we call coupling, if you couple them, then this wall moves, the air molecules are moving in the sound, and it'll also move this wall, and they'll move together, which will let the sound pass through. And usually that's gonna be the low end, right? That's gonna be the low, heavy frequencies that have a lot of energy. So what we wanna do is an air gap is gonna give some space for this wall to move, and then the air to move and then hit this wall and have to try to vibrate this wall again to get the stuff to move through again. So air gaps are huge and really important to stopping sound. So there's a few things there for you, but now I want to get into something that could help you with a room that's already built, like a bedroom, right? Like you're like, how do I soundproof a bedroom? I'm in my bedroom, I got my project studio in the bedroom. The first thing I would recommend is that you switch out your door. And I know it sounds simple, but if you take an internal door, like an inside door, usually they're designed to have a hollow core. You can easily go to Lowe's or Home Depot or even order a door online that's gonna be the same size that has a solid core to it, okay? So you get a solid wood, solid core door. And that solid core door, if you just replace the door to your bedroom and you sealed all the air gaps around the door, you could actually make up a ton of soundproofing. You can get up to like 20 dB, 20 STC of soundproofing, which means you're stopping 20 dB of sound, right? Which is huge. It's a massive amount of sound pressure and energy. So just that, switch out your door. That's a massive tip. And even if you got that much out of this module, it'll be worth you watching this, right? Now, the last thing I want to talk about, and this is so important to soundproofing and keeping your sound tight and your studio quiet, is air, okay? An air gap in anything. It doesn't matter if it's a light switch that wasn't wrapped with acoustic putty. These light bulbs up here, if they're not wrapped with acoustic putty, there's any air passing through anything. The wall, because you put an air conditioner in the wall, the door isn't sealed, all the gaps in the door aren't sealed, then you're gonna lose massive amounts of soundproofing, because the air tightness, anywhere there's air, right? And this is a great way of putting this. You could have a foot thick of concrete and you could drill a 1-inch hole through that thick concrete and have everything else sealed up. But because that 1-inch hole in that concrete, you could lose over 25 dB, 25 STC really of soundproofing, because there's an air gap there. And the way that the sound molecules work is sound is gonna vibrate the air and the molecules in the air, and it's gonna carry through the air, right? And what you're doing by building thickness and different types of materials and things like that, and air gaps, is we're trying to dissipate that energy. We're trying to stop that energy so it goes, oh, okay, it's gone, right? But if you have an air gap, it'll go right through it. And if it goes through the air, then you have a lot less soundproofing and you have noise. And when you have noise, we know this again, we have a lot more level of noise in the room, which means we can't hear our full dynamic range, or we have a smaller dynamic range, which means you're gonna miss, the click, the pop that was in the vocal that your homie just cut, right? The little, or the clip on the microphone, or the clip on the preamp, or the fact that you're distorting the compressor too much, right? Just simple things. You want to be precise as a mixing engineer, a producer, a mastering engineer, a beat maker. You want to be a sound designer. You want to be as precise as possible with your sound so the intentions could come across with your art. And that's where the soundproofing ties into the art of what music is and what sound is. So hopefully this module has been really helpful for you to understand the difference between acoustic design, which is tuning the room to be as even as possible for the sound coming through the speaker, and soundproofing, which is keeping the STC down, right? As low as possible, the sound transmission of energy coming outside to the inside of the room or inside the room to outside of the world, right? And the air gaps, keeping and sealing every single thing that air can move through. The different materials that you want to use, wood, use drywall, use concrete, use whatever you can to have different materials to stop different frequencies from coming through the wall. The air gap between the different materials. Having air gaps allows more dissipation of energy, which gives you a higher STC rating, which means, that's right, we got a lot more dynamic range in the actual studio. We have a much lower sound pressure level in the studio. We're gonna hear everything much clearer. We're gonna make artistic choices and scientific choices with our music to have clarity and clearness and get hired by more labels, publishers, clients that want you to mix and master them, produce their records, because they come to you because you have everything they're looking for in the music. You have the details, and the details come from being able to actually even hear the details. So that's it. That's soundproofing. And go out there, don't spend a ton of money. I'm gonna show you some double door construction real quick. I'm gonna show you some ways that we seal and make sure that the air is sealed tight within this room. And this construction has just happened, and some things that we're about to add as well that are gonna keep this STC even lower so that we can have even more soundproofing within this room before we tune it. All right, let's get into it.